Hello, everybody. This is Floyd Abrams. This is Speaking Freely, and we are really honored today to have Suzanne Nossel, who is the CEO of PEN America, to come to talk with me about Salman Rushdie, someone who she knows very well and with whom she's worked through the years. Uh, Suzanne is one of the leading defenders, most important defenders of human rights and free expression in the United States. And of course, PEN is an organization which within our country and other PEN entities throughout the world exist for the very purpose of defending free expression. So, Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Floyd.
Uh, you've known Salman Rushdie for many years. We're meeting here in the aftermath of the brutal attack on him just a few weeks ago. Perhaps we could start by just asking how you came to know him and the work that you and he have done together.
Yeah, sure. Well, Salman, when after the fatwa was issued in 1989, he stayed in hiding for nearly a decade, but then he came out and he moved to New York and he got involved with PEN America. PEN America had been very stalwart by his side during the darkest days, organizing events, rallying writers, standing by bookstores that were threatened with violence and victimized by violence. And it had been a galvanizing campaign for the organization and a focal point for writers to stand up for and with Rushdie. And so when he could live more freely, I think it says a lot that he threw himself into this organization and felt he had a contribution to make. He became president of PEN America in 2005. And in that capacity, he launched the PEN World Voices Festival, an annual literary festival of writers from around the world who come to New York for a week of panels and dialogues and readings and engagement with American writers. And he did it in the aftermath of 9/11, really out of a concern that the US was turning inward and cutting itself off from the rest of the world, and that literature and writers could be a bridge of sorts, and that those connections would be incredibly important. And so when I got to Penn in 2013, the festival was going strong. It was getting ready to celebrate its 10th anniversary a year later, and Salman was still deeply involved. I think that set a great deal as well. We had had other past presidents here in New York City, and they may come to an occasional event sort of here and there, and they keep in touch. But Salman was a pervasive presence within the organization. He was still deeply engaged in planning each year's festival and who would be coming, often opening up the festival with his own remarks and events. And so throughout my time, he's been kind of a ballast for us as well, such a ramrod, staunch defender of free expression, somebody that we turn to in situations of pressure or question or dilemma, someone who can be relied upon as a strong voice on behalf of imperiled writers around the world, those who are in jail, prosecuted, or persecuted for what they say. Salman will speak out and rise to their defense. And he's just been a very steady ally and champion of the cause. I think his entire career. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Up until just the hours before this stabbing attack, I had an email exchange with him about imperiled writers from Ukraine and whether we could help get them to refuge here in the United States.
I met him for the first time in 2011 when he gave his first speech in the US after the fatwa had been announced and in effect for all those years. And he gave a speech at Columbia University, wonderful wonderful, moving speech. Through the years, I mean, the fatwa was 1989, and in the years that you've known him, has there been, considerable concern about personal security, or did that seem to be behind him?
You know, I think by all accounts, it seemed to be behind him. I mean, we have had so many events with Salman. He's a regular fixture at our annual galas, and as I mentioned, at the festival. And we have not been involved in special security arrangements on his behalf during that time. So I think he, is someone who was not going to live in fear, and that when things just seemed to ease up, he embraced life and he was out there. He's a very social, gregarious person and has lived very freely. And that always seemed like a perfectly reasonable choice, which is part of why this came as such a stunning shock.
Yeah. One of the things that you said, I'll just read you two lines right after the attack, the assault on him. You wrote that the attack on Rushdie is a wake up call for all of us who have a stake in free expression, which is to say, all of us, period. And you said, as we tell the story of the attack on him, we must elucidate its larger lessons. What do you have in mind as lessons from the attack?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something that I've been contemplating for sure over the last 5 days. This comes at a time, as you know, Floyd, of great kind of encroachment on freedom of expression on all sides. We put out a report this morning here at Penn America, our latest report on what we call educational gag orders, bans on what can be taught in the college classroom here in the United States, scores of bills that are being introduced in legislatures across the country. We're dealing, by the day with new book bans. Just this morning, hearing that I think Texas is pulling out from the Scholastic Book Fair, that annual event that is such an important gateway for students to access all sorts of books and develop a passion for books and literature. And so we're witnessing these encroachments from all sides, and it's here in the United States, which is startling because of our First Amendment protections and the freedoms to which we are accustomed. But it's part of a pattern all over the world of rising authoritarianism, and we document every year what we call the Freedom to Write Index, which is a census of writers in prison in a given year. And for 2021, there are 277 writers in jail. And so this does form part of a multifaceted pattern where I worry that we're turning our back on freedom of expression. And it's not something that's limited to fascist governments around the world, that's limited to any one side of the political spectrum. I think we have kind of lost the thread in terms of why it is that we defend even offensive or controversial speech, why free speech needs to be a principle that sits above politics, the ways in which free speech underwrites our ability to drive forward all kinds of other causes, whether it's environmental justice or women's rights or LGBTQ rights, reproductive rights. All of that depends upon freedom of speech protections. And so, we have been alarmed for a while and trying to sound that alarm bell about these encroachments both around the world and here in the United States. And I hope we do look back on this as something of a wake up call, that such a dastardly incident could take place on U.S. soil, is a reflection, I think, of some large and disturbing trends.
When you use the word book bans, what do you mean? I mean, not assigning certain books, not allowing certain books to be in school libraries. Could you flesh that out a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. Look, it takes on a number of different forms, and we've come up with a kind of definition for our own purposes because we're counting and tracking all the book bans that are publicly reported here in the United States. And so we include bans on books in school libraries, in public libraries, when a book is on a curriculum and it is taken off on the basis of an objection. We count that as well. We track whether these objections are taking place and being handled with a kind of due process. In other words, organizations like the American Library Association, the National Coalition Against Censorship have put forward procedures whereby, if you have concerns about a book, you think it's too explicit for the particular grade level or the content is not appropriate, you can raise those concerns and the book gets kind of adjudicated. People read it, a panel is assembled that it may include a teacher, a parent, a librarian, and a reasoned decision is made. That's not, for the most part, what's happening here. Overwhelmingly, these book bans are taking place without any kind of process. There are whole lists of books that are being circulated around school boards and even legislatures across the country and being banned collectively and summarily in cases where it's quite clear that nobody's actually read the book or attended to what the content is. And so it's become a kind of culture war weapon that seems to be accelerating.
Give me an example of a book that has been banned in the sense that you're using the word of a book ban.
Sure. I mean, oftentimes these books are on subject matters dealing with race and LGBTQ identities. So, a book like George Johnson's Genderqueer is has been at the top of many of the lists. Books by Carmen Maria Machado as well. And there's sort of a number of authors, but it goes very broad. I mean, it's Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Jodi Picoult books. And so it's very broad brush for Floyd, and that's
Right,
because oftentimes no one's even reading these books. People kind of get a whiff of what it is, or
right.
they think it fits into a particular category, and or it makes a list that a mobilizing group circulates, and that can be enough to get it banned.
And by ban, you mean not assigned or taken out of a library? I mean,
Usually,
what?
it's
Yeah,
removed from either a school library or a public library.
right.
But some instances, it's taken off curriculum.
But public libraries in our country have
Yes,
dropped books or not literally, I mean, taken books off the shelf? I
they
guess
are,
so.
Floyd.
Yes,
They
yeah,
are.
yeah. No, no, I
Yes.
it's,
I'll send you our report
yeah,
because I
yeah.
think it's important that you know about
Yes, no,
it.
I mean, on one level, it's an old problem, but the idea that, here we are in this century, and that in our libraries, we we are the people in control, politicians, whatever, are literally stepping in not to urge that something be read, but to bar something else from being read. Stunning.
Yeah, I mean it is absolutely, and this
Yeah.
is it's not an old thing in the sense that at least you may know more about this, but our impression that at Penn, when I first got to Penn, we always handled book bans. I was surprised when I arrived at the organization because it seemed so anachronistic to me. I was thought who's still banning books in America, but we would deal with a couple of cases a year,
Yeah.
typically in a school district or a library here or there. We would usually write a letter. Very oftentimes the book would be restored to the shelves, and so that was the end of it. And there were isolated incidences. It was a particular individual who got to be in their bonnet about a book and raised a concern. And that's
Right.
normal. This is something different. This is a concerted, orchestrated campaign that has been being fueled by organizations. One is called Moms for Liberty, or there's another that's called No Left Turn in Education, that are working to mobilize activists to challenge these books in community after community and using that as a rallying cry and a political tactic. And I don't know that we've ever seen that before.
Right. And are most of these from the right politically? I mean, a lot of certainly what I have been most what's sort of personally aware of are more left of center crackdowns on certain sorts of material, but what you're describing would be more of the what our political right.
Yeah, they are overwhelmingly coming from the right. There are some instances, for example, where districts have banned certain books because they contain the N word or other racial
Uh,
slurs. So, this is not a tactic that is limited to the right. And I think there is overreach, certainly on the left. And it manifests sometimes in this way, but very oftentimes sort of in other ways with, censoriousness on college campuses or online. But this tactic of book bans and curriculum bans, which are pieces of legislation that bar the discussion and teaching of particular topics in higher education, those are really emanating overwhelmingly from the right. And what's so concerning about it is that it really is invoking the power of government
yeah,
to impose viewpoint based restrictions on speech. And so it really hits to the core of the First Amendment. Now, of course, communities and legislatures do have authority over school curriculum, and they have some say over what is taught in the classroom. And so that's what makes it an area that's not entirely open and shut, I don't think, from a legal or constitutional perspective. But I think it is
yeah,
very important to recognize and call this out for what it is, which is viewpoint based censoriousness.
yeah. I mean, as you well know, I mean, occasionally cases like this have reached not just the courts, but certainly in one important case, the U.S. Supreme Court. But I mean, have the courts been available now? Are they sort of open now? Are they of help in defending First Amendment rights in this area?
It's not clear. There are a couple of cases that are wending their way. One of the challenges is, this is happening predominantly in red states, which are in kind of red leaning judicial districts. And so it's not clear, how this is going to come out. And obviously the shape of the jurisprudence, is evolving so quickly at the Supreme Court level as well. So I think it's
Yeah,
it's it's honestly hard to know. In the one case, you know, that is on the books, Supreme Court case, the Pico case, is a
yeah,
plurality decision and really pretty kind of fragmented in terms of the reasoning. It doesn't offer a very clear guide.
yeah. No, and that, that was noticeable at the time it was issued, at a time when I and lots of others celebrated, as we still do, the result of that opinion, but worried about how much of a bar it would be to censorship in the future. Let, us just get back to Salman Rushdie for a few minutes. What sort of uh, activities, speeches, and the like have you and he been delivered together? Who have you appeared before?
Yeah, I mean, he and I had an event together to talk about my book, Dare to Speak. He was involved at the journalism school at NYU and invited me to take part in that with him. I have a vivid memory of him opening up the festival one year and confronting a heckler when he was up on stage at the Great Hall at Cooper Union. And Salman, he just kind of has a masterful way and a great confidence. I remember this heckler was going on, and at a certain point, Salman sort of said, "You've had your say. Now I'm going to have mine." And he kind of just
Yeah,
subdued this person to the point where he retreated. But the most recent encounter in terms of an event that we had was in May of this year. We convened a emergency PEN America Writers Congress in the chamber at the United Nations, bringing together writers who are here in New York as part of the World Voices Festival for a collective discussion about a set of cascading crises, including the Ukraine war, that were captivating all of us. And Salman spoke just so eloquently at that event.
what what direction would you say we're going in? I mean, do we seem to be moving towards more or less freedom of expression in our country and in the world?
You know, I think there are some ways in which, particularly on social media, that's a boon for free expression. In some ways, people can reach an audience, whereas in the old-fashioned world of magazine and book publishing, they never could have. And
Yeah.
so that's democratized the landscape for free expression. There's a lot of effort to try to dismantle barriers to free expression from members of historically marginalized groups, whether those are racial minorities or gender minorities. We do a lot of work at PEN America in lifting up and amplifying the voices of the incarcerated and connecting them with opportunities to be heard in the public domain. And so, there are positives for free expression that I think we ought not lose sight of, but there are also threats to not just to free expression, but to healthy public discourse that are unprecedented. The rise of disinformation, flooding the zone with untruths that have sowed, I think, for a large part of the American population at this point, a deep confusion about what can and can't believe, and a kind of false flag faith in falsehoods, deliberate disinformation, lies that have been put forward for political and pecuniary purposes that people have now subscribed to so deeply that they cannot be dislodged. And we're seeing this right now in our politics. And so that, to me, represents a profound threat to freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, in my mind, is not just the right to spout off. It's the ability to engage, to persuade, to be persuaded, to search for the truth. And in a public arena that is flooded and overwhelmed with disinformation, those powers are lost. They wither, and I think we're seeing that right now. And so, unprecedented opportunities, but also, threats that are really difficult to get your arms around. There are no easy answers. It's not just disinformation cannot be banned or outlawed.
Well,
That is not
I was
permissible.
just going to ask you about that. I mean, there obviously a lot of, perhaps most of, the disinformation is protected by the First Amendment. Is it
That's
not?
right.
Yeah.
No, it is.
So
But to me, Floyd, what's so important is, for free speech defenders, is that, even though we see no solution, or we worry that the solutions that might be put forward could be inimical to free speech, that must not mean that we put our heads in the sand when it comes to the problem. I think we have
yeah,
to be forthright about the problems, because the problems affect free speech too. I mean, the power of being able to write a bracing, piercing article and reach people through it is atrophies when you've got half of the US population that is convinced that any publication you might put that article in is
yeah,
discreditable and not to be believed. And so I think we have to own up to the breadth of these issues, and while acknowledging that some of the solutions may be worse than the problems that they aim to solve.
right. No, I think that's a very important observation. Let me ask you a last question. What, as of now, what's the legacy of Salman Rushdie?
I mean, I'm very heartened to say I don't think we have to broach that question yet, because Salman is recovering, and I fully expect that he's going to resume his writing and his speaking and his activism. But with that said, there's just no question. I think he's an embodiment of the fight for the freedom to write, and he's a galvanizing figure. He is fearless. He has stood up. He is now paid an incredibly high price for living life openly and dauntlessly as a writer, taking on orthodoxy, telling the stories that he has wanted to tell, and trying to create space for others to do the same, ever diligently working to keep that landscape open and to have the backs of writers who take similar risks. And so it's a very powerful legacy, and one that is inspiring to me personally. At PEN America, we're celebrating our centenary this year. And I think Salman is one of the people that are going to galvanize us and fuel us into the next 100 years of this fight.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Suzanne. You are also, I don't exaggerate, one of the people who are great, pervasive, unforgettable defenders of free expression here and abroad. So thanks for your work and thanks for coming on today.